Good afternoon. Our next session is on the ethics of emerging life-saving therapies and technologies. This session is going to be led by Dr. Udit Batra. He is the CEO of Millipore Sigma, which is owned by Merck. Dr. Batra has PhD from Princeton University. Uditji, do you want to take over?
Namaskar everyone, and I think the food has taken away quite a few of our attendees, but I suspect once we start and once our esteemed panel starts to debate, we'll drag them back in. If you've read the abstract, you would know that we are indeed in a golden age of innovation, especially in healthcare. And I would even argue that so many technologies have moved from the lab into the clinic that many of us who operate in this ecosystem, and we represent different parts of the healthcare ecosystem, have been caught unprepared. Be it technologies such as cell and gene therapy, which we will talk about, or areas such as artificial intelligence and machine learning and their applications to modern healthcare and how hospitals are operating and how patients are treated. We hope to engage the panel in a robust debate and also solicit questions from you. So we'll stop, and if you believe that something's unclear while we are speaking, please put your hand up, and I'll make sure that we address your question as we go along. We also, towards the end of the panel, want to talk a little bit about the ethics and the bioethics of cell and gene editing, cell and gene therapy, as well as artificial intelligence, where there are quite divergent sets of view on how much freedom there should be and how much freedom there shouldn't be in different parts of applications. So we'll talk a little bit about our views on that aspect as well. Before we get started, I think it's really important that our panelists give a short introduction and tell you what they want you to take away from this particular panel. And we'll start with Dr. Gupta.
Thank you, Udit, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me here. I'll be talking about artificial intelligence. That's a research topic of mine. I cannot go to a conference today as a radiologist and somebody not stopping me and asking the question, is your job going to be there 10 years from now? So that's the power of what we're talking about. My answer in a sort of a flip way is very simple. In 10 years, I'm going to retire, so I don't really care. But this is a very transformative technology, and I'll describe it a little bit, but I think it behooves on all of us to educate ourselves a little bit, because no matter what you do, what aspect of entrepreneurship or what you're engaged in, this is something that's going to touch you.
Thank you, Rajiv. Ganesh?
Hi, first, thanks for this opportunity. It's been a very fun day today. I've learned a lot. So I'm in the pharmaceutical product side of things. So I've been working for the last 20 years developing biological therapies, and of course, there's a lot of very exciting innovation that's happening on that front. But part of it is also to be able to take those exciting innovations and be able to make it affordable and accessible so that you can, so there's not a haves and have-nots that start to emerge in this healthcare. You know, not everybody can afford everything. And you're seeing that debate very wildly raging in this country now. So hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about what some barriers of that are and how we can maybe impact some of these cutting-edge technologies that are coming out to become more accessible to more people.
Thank you, Ganesh. Maha?
Hello, everyone. Maha Radhakrishnan. I'm an internist by training. I was in clinical practice for about 7 years, and then I've been in pharma for the last 17 years. I would say my objective today is essentially to be able to give you all a medical, clinical viewpoint of where we are with cell and gene therapies. What are some of the benefits? What are some of the aspects we need to consider more deeply as we look at the benefit risk of these paradigm shifting innovations in healthcare?
Amar?
My name is Amar Sahani, and I'm a chemical engineer, entrepreneur in the medical device and biopharma area. And my area of expertise is in medical devices that either are improvements over existing therapies or address the problem in a whole different way so that the continuum of care changes. So what I hope we might be able to take away from this discussion is, what are different ways of solving problems, the pace of change that's taking place, the new types of solutions that are emerging, how are we going to pay for these solutions, and value-based medicine, these types of things. I hope we come away with a bigger picture as to advancement is good, what are the ethics of the advancement, who's going to pay for these advances, et cetera.
Thank you, Amar. Rahul?
Good afternoon, everyone. Rahul Singhvi. I'm also a chemical engineer by training, and large part of my career has been in development and manufacturing of vaccines, so a different modality in pharmaceuticals, but very important not only because of the economic impact that vaccines have had on health, but also the importance of that modality to what's coming. So when we talk about cell and gene therapies, which are living medicines, there is a lot we can learn from what we have done in vaccines, which are also living medicines. So I think what I'd like to do is to see if we can translate the learnings from vaccines into making these new modalities like cell and gene therapies more affordable by using some of the old tricks. And most recently, I've just joined a venture capital firm where I'm doing exactly that, where I have taken 25 years of my experience in vaccines and now applying them to the more innovative modalities that are coming up from the new biology, cell and gene therapies being some of them, and hopefully applying them to make those type of medicines more affordable. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. Nisha?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nisha Subramanian. I'm a consultant in the healthcare and pharmaceutical space for the last 10 plus years. I will be talking more about the commercialization angle of these cell and gene therapies. And if there's one thing I hope you can take away is how exciting this space is and how much innovation there is in the space, both from a clinical side as well as a commercialization side. And in spite of all the challenges in facing this space, I'm hopeful you take away that this is really one of the exciting spaces to be in healthcare today.
Thank you, all of you. And as a panel, collectively, we want to start by having a common understanding of what we're talking about. So what I'll ask Maha to do is briefly describe what gene therapy is, and followed by that, Rajiv will describe what AI is. I know many of you are already experts in these areas, but it's helpful for all of us come to the same level of education in these concepts. Please, sure. Maha.
So I'll start off by thanking Udit for inviting me to be part of this panel. Thank you. And also it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon, because as I was listening to the sessions earlier today, what struck me was the common thread that we all have, the passion to make an impact, the desire to make a change and be able to really change the face of what we do, no matter what industry or technology we are part of. So to start off, what are gene therapies? So gene therapies essentially are treatments used to essentially deliver either a functional gene to patients with genetic disorders or to modify a patient's genome when a patient either lacks a specific gene or has mutated genes which causes a certain disease condition. And I want to take some time to talk about, okay, what are the areas we're looking at when we look at the medical conditions that can potentially be impacted by using cell and gene technologies. So today, as you may or may not know, there are quite a few genetic or gene therapies already approved by the regulators. We recently have seen approvals coming in the neuromuscular space and spinal muscular atrophy. We've seen approvals coming for beta thalassemia, and I'll explain a little bit more in the next few minutes. And we all know that the area of oncology is just ballooning with gene therapies in development right now. So as I look to say, okay, what is gene therapy, right? What does it involve? Actually, I would say it's a pretty complicated process, but at the same time, quite exciting, because we're venturing into a space that we've really never gone into before. It requires harvesting of cells, whether it be a patient's own autologous cells or allogenic cells from the outside. These cells are then conditioned. These cells are conditioned by using what we call as vectors or viruses or capsids in order for us to be able to deliver these genes, either functional genes or modified genes, into the patients. These patients also need to go through chemoablation or chemotherapies to make sure that their bodies are ready to receive the infusion of these gene therapies. And what you see at the end is these gene therapies being infused, and as a result, what we hear is therapies being approved. So let's take the case of beta thalassemia. So for those of you who know, this is a hematological condition where patients lack the beta globin gene. What ends up happening as a result of that is red blood cells in the human body have a very short lifespan. These patients live their lives I would say, in a very, very chronic, very serious mode, because they have to go through blood transfusions regularly, sometimes as high as 12 to 20 times a year. And it's not just blood transfusions, but the burden of this also is that they end up having iron overload, because of which they have to go through chelation, or as we call as iron depletion therapy. And as a result of which, these patients also end up having severe end organ damage. And end organ damage then necessitates transplantation. So that's essentially the life that these patients with beta thalassemia are living with. And what we've seen is recent approvals of a gene therapy from a company that essentially allows a patient to be able to lead a normal life. The data from these therapies essentially has made these patients independent from blood transfusions. So this, to me, is the wow factor. As a physician, I want to make sure that every patient who has a chronic condition, whether it be genetically inherited or a metabolic dysfunction or disorder, be able to live the life they need. So again, this is the case of beta thalassemia. If you take the other side, you look at conditions like hemophilia, for example, or spinal muscular atrophy, it's the same situation. Patients with spinal muscular atrophy are usually babies, right? Babies who are newborn, who are diagnosed with a defect in the SMN1 gene that impacts the production of the SMN protein in the body. What ends up happening is these babies cannot sit up. They have muscular dysfunction, and they've also usually die very young with SMN type 1 at the age of 2, 3, 6 months because of respiratory distress. And now I'm happy to say there are 2 therapies approved from 2 different companies that essentially allow these babies to have regular life. There are babies who are able to live past that initial barrier of potentially dying because of these respiratory distresses and not being able to sit or stand and walk. So that's the progress we've made today. You know, and I would say one of the questions Udit had asked me was, how effective are they? I would say they are very, very effective. They are life-changing. And I'm hoping as we go through the panel, we'll have the opportunity to talk about the benefits and also the risks. But I don't want to make this a didactic talk, so I'm going to stop here and leave questions for the later.
We could listen to you for a long time, Maha. Thank you. Simply said, you have a combination of engineers, business people, engineers who have become business people, physicians on the panel, and we all have different perspectives, and that'll be something I'll try to draw out based on our backgrounds. So one of the things I always wonder is, if it is curative, why is it that we can't get it to many, many patients rapidly, number one? And number two, why does it have to be such a complex process to make it? And I know some of the panelists will illuminate why is it complex and what we're going to do to fix it. Let's move on to the other jargon that we're using, and this is the area of artificial intelligence. And Rajiv, you scared us all by saying that we won't work after a decade, since you plan to retire in a decade. I have the ambition to continue to work, so tell us it's going to be different.
It's going to be different. No. So I feel very comfortable giving talks with slides, so I also prepared some slides. And if you can put the slides up, they'll be useful. Oh, the slides are up there? I see it's only on that side?
No, there's nothing there.
Okay. This side they say, okay, but I can't see what's up. So, but that's okay. I kind of know what we're talking about. So before we introduce what artificial intelligence is, it has had a long history of what AI is. AI has been going on for since 1940s, and it has gone through phases. So one of the slides that I'm showing you is from the last time there was a big AI hype, and that was when Deep Blue beat the then reigning champion for chess. That was in 1997, and that was the last time when a human being was a chess champion of the world. So there are human chess champions of the world, and there are computer chess champions of the world, and Deep Blue is nowhere in that league actually now. What has happened from that day to now is a quantum shift. It has, what Deep Blue was essentially a program that was taught by people who knew chess well. It knew how to organize and analyze board positions. It could score board positions, and it will always move to a better board position. So it was basically doing what computers always did well: compute, calculate, and keep scores. What has changed since then has been described as the fourth industrial revolution. And that is the picture to the next of it. It is from the cover of Science. This was a time when within a few hours, a computer program called AlphaZero from Google learned not only to play chess, it learned how to play Go and Shogi. These are also games of strategy, very difficult games to learn, and it became the world champion in all three games. It beat out all the other computer programs that could play the game. So that is the power of artificial intelligence, where computers can now learn from examples. They don't have to be taught the algorithm of how to solve a problem. They can solve a problem themselves. And that's why this whole thing about self-driving cars. So there is all the industrial states, the Midwest states, they used to have a lot of industry. The industry went away. One of the biggest industry there now is driving. Now the threat is the driving going to be taken away? Are we going to have self-driving trucks? So just look at the change in paradigm that is happening. And this paradigm shift is going to touch all of us, as I said previously. So I want to go to the next slide. And can you go back one? And I don't know if the audio will work from in this slide or not. This is a clip from the last presidential Democratic debate where Andrew Wang is talking about this fourth industrial revolution.
The fourth industrial revolution is now migrating from manufacturing workers to retail, call centers, transportation, as well as to white-collar workers like attorneys, pharmacists, and radiologists. It does not care about our party.
So that essentially what he's saying is, this is something that all the cognitive tasks, what I do, what most accountants do, what many other physicians do, will be taken over by this paradigm. Already in my discipline, I'm seeing many tasks are being automated. There are programs, FDA-approved programs, that can do pathology better than many pathologists can do. There are programs that can find nodules in a chest CT better than I can find nodules in a chest CT. So can you go over to the next slide, please? So we had a conference, that's actually where I met Mukesh, on what is the power of this technology. And they came up with this list of 12 disruptive dozens. I won't read the list, but just about everything in medicine is being affected by it. And the paradigm actually transcends medicine. And the key to this paradigm is computers learning on their own with the help of examples. Just like you can teach a child, you never teach a child what is the algorithm for differentiating between a cat and a dog. The child, just by example, learns what is a cat, what is a dog. The face recognition problem, computers do that much better than humans do. FBI never uses human beings for recognizing terrorists. It is a job of a computer to do that. Boston bomber was picked out by a computer program from an audio feed in a Delhi. So that is I can give you examples after examples of where this paradigm is taking us. Can you go to the next slide, please? And obviously, there will be dilemmas. So the internet is full of pictures, which are kind of funny to look at. You can swap people's faces into pictures. So as in this case, for example, they have swapped the child face with the kid's face and the dad's face. There are all, go to the next slide, please. So there are all sorts of things on the internet. So President Trump wants to build a wall. So obviously there's a movie in India about President Trump's wall, a movie called Diwar, appropriately named. Go to the next one, please. And of course, he can do so he can do this to entire video streams. So there are videos where Donald Trump is dancing to the Bhangra beat better than I can. That's because they've taken a nice Indian movie and just replaced the lead actor's face with his face, and he actually has expressions. It is not just like a cartoon. Go to the next one. So, but this technology is not without flaws. Okay, it creates its own dilemmas and problems. So I teach a course at Harvard Medical School where I teach them how an X-ray tube works. Okay, an X-ray tube is a very simple tube. You boil off some electrons. The electrons go to a highly positively charged anode. They hit the anode, X-rays come out. And this is what a very simple X-ray tube would look like. So I've been teaching this class for many, many years. About 3-4 years ago, one of the students says, "That looks like a crack pipe." So I didn't know, I said, well, I have no personal experience with a crack pipe. Can you send me a picture? So could you go to the next slide, please? So he sent me this picture, and it's a little bit hard to describe, but a lot of similarity between the two. Okay, he says there's a cup on the bottom picture, which is the crack pipe. You put the crack there, you plug it in, it heats up the crack. You get high, just like in the other case, you boil off electrons. Here you boil off crack, and then the crack comes out, hits the electrons come out, hit the anode. You get high energy photons. Over here, you just get high. So I said, well, it sounds pretty interesting, but I looked at it a little bit more carefully. So what the student did was he had a concept of what a crack pipe looks like. He Googled crack pipe, and he got the Google images, and he picked the image that looked most like the image that I'd shown him. And what he had picked out is actually an X-ray tube. It is not a crack pipe. It is the AI algorithm that Google uses to classify picture has a bug, and you're seeing the bug. Okay. So this is where the Achilles heel of this thing is. When you talk about similarity of things, you need a human supervision of some sort before you can actually let it loose. That's why the deadline for self-driving cars has been pushed back a long time, because the human behavior, what's happening on the street, is highly variable. If you would go to the next slide, please. So this is what the real crack pipe looks like. Okay, next slide. So the other thing that this technology cannot do, it can find what is there in an image. You can do just like in a Word document, you do Control F and search something. This is Control F for pictures, if you will. It can tell you exactly what is there in the image, but it cannot tell you what is wrong with this image. And that is a human's job. So all the ethical questions, if you have a judgment to make, you have to have a human in the loop. You can think of this just an augmentative technology that just like everything else that we use in our lives. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rajiv. That was a little bit scary, but I would say not so much, because I still think human beings have intuition and impressions that are formed well in advance of and remain well in advance of many of the AI algorithms that we might know. Now that we have a common understanding of what cell and gene therapy is and what AI is, let's talk a little bit about the business aspects of this. I'll start with you, Amar, and I'm conscious that you're jet-lagged, but I think Rajiv and Maha's introduction was quite entertaining, so I don't think you've fallen asleep. What is the financing environment for cell and gene therapy companies or those that are starting to do AIs? Amar, by the way, if you haven't read his CV, is a serial entrepreneur, so he knows how to get money.
It's actually very good. Briefly, I think AI use cases in healthcare are still sort of emerging. I don't think they are that mature yet. Healthcare is typically more of a lagging area relative to consumer products or technology or other places where the use cases are more easily adopted. So there are a lot of companies that are coming about with various types of propositions. For example, I was approached recently by a company that is taking for classifying amount of blood loss that's taking place in surgery. So they have gauze that's blood soaked and they hold it up and the imaging algorithm analyzes that and determines how much blood loss has taken place. So you can keep track of how much blood the patient has lost without actually having any other way of doing it. So things like that are emerging, counting sponges. I mean, but it's still not compelling enough, not transformative. So these are the ones that I look at saying they are sort of advances or better ways of doing current things.
So what advice, if we have budding entrepreneurs and I see some young kids or younger than us people in the audience, what advice would you have for people who want to get financing in these areas?
So I think, look, the environment is very good. People are actually looking for teams that can then go about and build in each one of these silos that are there, because the qualified groups and teams are just not available. So people are even willing to place bets on companies and acquire them because the talent has come together to solve a healthcare problem in AI, using AI. So I think the environment is good. Try to find yourself a compelling problem. In entrepreneurship, it's not about solutions. It's more about making sure you understand what the problem is. If you do a good job of sort of understanding what the problem is and then generating the appropriate solution, it'll be relevant. Oftentimes, we get enamored by the solution that we have, and we go around trying to looking for a problem. So I think you got to look at it the other way around. And then if you can apply AI tools to be able to solve that problem, then so be it. With cell and gene therapy, the application is obviously much more direct and much closer. That has taken off, and obviously it's a healthcare, squarely a healthcare thing. So the financing environment over there and the pricing, margins, et cetera, is good. The problems over there lie more around how do you take this personalized medicine and make it manufacturable, scalable, reach, and so that some of the poorer countries or poorer people are not disadvantaged, and would these bankrupt the healthcare system? Those are the sort of more the issues. I think the revolution is there, and there's a lot of money available.
So let's pick up on defining the problem. And I know, Rahul, in your introduction, you talked about your expertise in vaccines and how vaccines have become available to many, many, many people around the world. Probably only next to clean water, vaccines have transformed healthcare. What are you seeing in the area of cell and gene therapy as manufacturing bottlenecks, and what would you do?
Great. So let me just take a step back and explain gene therapy for a second. And in gene therapy, what you're trying to do is you're making a virus as a delivery vehicle to deliver a piece of DNA into a cell, as Maha pointed out. So I just want to repeat that, because in vaccines, particularly for viral vaccines, you're growing viruses that are attenuated to give them as vaccines to prevent disease. So in both cases, you're growing a virus. In one case, you're growing a virus to use as a decoy for the real stuff, so that your body can make the defense, can set up the defenses against the real stuff. But in the other case, you're using the virus as a delivery vehicle for the gene or for the DNA, piece of DNA. So in both cases, the common denominator is the viral growth. How do you make the virus? And in gene therapy, which is a very new field, this idea of growing viruses at very large scales at very low cost hasn't yet been solved, because the biology has moved so fast. And as Maha pointed out, the outcomes are so incredibly curative that there has been a brute force approach towards manufacturing. And so the first product that has come on the market is priced at over $2 million per patient. So talking about bankrupting the healthcare system in poor countries, forget about that. We will bankrupt US with that kind of pricing, right? So this is okay because this is the beginning of the S-curve, the beginning of the revolution where cost is going to be high. But the beauty of this is the biology is phenomenal. The biology is in our favor. And now it's an engineering problem, how to solve it. And this is why I have been employed by a company that is investing in this stuff, because they find that like this guy knows how to make viruses. And he's been doing for 25 years.
So we're optimistic that, Rahul, you will
Well,
solve the problem of getting
10 years later.
getting gene therapy to thousands
Well,
of patients.
that's the bet that the guy who employed me have taken. Now let's see what happens.
Now we are optimistic. Knowing you, I think you'll make a huge impact in that field. And just to put it in context, in one type of cell therapy, CAR T cell therapy, you incidentally take cells from a patient, and you basically use this virus that is carrying a gene, and insert it into the cell, and then it expresses a protein, and then you put that cell back into the patient. Right? That's all that is being done. I'm an engineer, right? So all that is being done is that, and that takes 30 to 40 days. It is full of challenges. It is not scalable. For an engineer, that's a straightforward problem, and I can see the engineers nodding on the panel. But physicians have been tasked to solve that problem, which I think physicians are better at solving some other problems. So we have a bit of a dichotomy on the stage, and I'll try to draw that out in a minute. Let's move on to affordability for a minute, and then we'll talk about industrialization. Let me start with you, Nisha. Rahul provoked everybody and said, look, it's going to bankrupt the US system. How do you think about such a problem?
So maybe just to start with, these are very expensive therapies. These are also very focused on rare diseases today. So if you think about the number of patients, for example, the first of these therapies that launched in cancer, there are 150 patients in all of the US, right, that this therapy is applicable for. So partly the cost is driven by the complex manufacturing, but also about the population that it focuses on. So today, the way, just to kind of get a sense of what's happening in the system, payers and companies are taking two main approaches to kind of solve this. The first one is to say, it's a huge payment if you do it in a one-time cost, but many of the companies that have launched so far are experimenting with how do you do this on an annuity. So payment is done on a year-by-year basis for a certain set of years versus doing it all at once. The second thing that's happening is focusing on outcomes. Most of these therapies, like Maha pointed out, are curative or close to curative. When you compare it with the other therapies that reduce symptoms or delay the progression of the disease, these actually solve and cure the condition. So there are also experiments going on, both from pharma companies and with payers, to say either you pay a part of the payment when you see the actual outcome and there's no progression after X years, or you get a rebate after you see X years. Now, all this, there's going to be incremental innovations in the payment mechanism, as you can see. I think there's going to be three things that could make these things evolve from a payment perspective. The first one, and this is a US-specific thing, is just how much of consolidation is happening in the healthcare industry, especially as you see more and more of the hospitals starting to acquire payers acquiring PBMs, and so on. You're starting to come up with a much more integrated system. And the advantage that has is you have visibility then that the right patients actually get the therapy, and you're able to follow the patient. Because today, in an average, most people change their insurers within 1 year or 2 years. So if you think of it, it's a very big burden for an insurer to bear, to pay this entire upfront cost. But as you see more and more consolidation happen, you will see the models evolving a lot. The second thing that I think, as you think of longer term, these therapies in 5 years are not going to be focusing only on rare conditions. Most of the stuff, especially in cancer, if you see for development, are for much more broader patient populations. And thereby, you will just see the model of delivery, the pricing model, all of that evolve as you see this in the longer term. And the last one, I do have my hopes right now on Rahul. The manufacturing is extremely complex for this therapy. And I know Udit had mentioned 30 to 40 days, but I know there are cases where patients have waited, right, for this entire period. And remember, the patients, when they come to this stage, their average lifespan is 2 months. So 30 days is a big deal to wait for this entire therapy to be delivered. As you simplify the manufacturing system, and if you can get, today the pharma companies actually manufacture these drugs, but if you get to a state where you can almost modify this therapy in the hospital, right? Take the virus, inject the virus into the cell, and put it back into the patient in the hospital. That is when this is going to be truly disruptive, because then you're going to make this affordable. All you need to do is go into a hospital, and it'll be like any other surgery that you're doing. Is this going to be easy? No, but this is, I think, is going to be the ultimate unlock for this therapy to be affordable.
ऐसा बोल रहे हैं जैसे सब्जी की दुकान में जाके सब्जी ले रहे हैं. I mean, these are hugely, sorry to switch to Hindi for those of you who don't understand, but I couldn't help it. It's a very, very difficult problem to take these new types of genes, new types of techniques, and to scale them up. And I know, Ganesh, you have a bit of experience in industrializing techniques and industrializing new technology. What advice would you have, and what would you suggest, and how are you participating in this ecosystem?
Great. So I started this journey in biotech first, wanting to cure or wanting to treat diseases like cancer and autoimmune disease. But along the way, I got to learn a lot about even the healthcare in this country, where there are many drugs that people here that are already in the market, have been in the market for many years, but can't afford it. And I was actually shocked to hear. I thought that was in the in the developing world, like India and back home. But here, to see patients not taking their drugs was actually very surprising to me. And over the last 20 years, I've been working on different aspects of it. But the best parallel I can see is if you look at every other industry, right? You have version 1 that comes out where it's a prototype, and then by the time version 2, 3, 4, 5 comes along, you have optimized it, you've made it better, you have increased the efficiency, and innovation has happened all along. In healthcare, there are multiple challenges. Maybe I'll engage by a show of hands. When was the last time you paid less for a drug than what you paid 2 years ago? I don't think so at all. So imagine if iPhone had used the pricing model that they would do for drugs. iPhone 11 would be costing you somewhere where each new model is priced on top of what is already in the market. iPhone 11 will probably now be at around $9,000 or $9,500, right? So there is an inherent challenge of healthcare where next generation products have to come in, and the older generation have to get more efficient and have to get better and bring competition into the picture. So when you look at cell and gene therapy and things like that, the first kind of innovation that happens is an actually creation of that first product. But there's a whole host of innovation that needs to happen to create more efficient manufacturing systems, better modes of delivery, being able to practice these not in just centers of excellence, but being able to practice it in the field. All of that involved excellent and very interesting opportunities for innovative technologies that can come in to actually bring the cost down overall.
Thank you. Thank you, Ganesh. Are there any questions from the audience? I think you've had an introduction. You've seen some views on how we solve the manufacturing challenges, how we look at the payer problem, how we look at the financing problem, and how we think about the industrialization of these therapies. Are there any questions from the audience at this point? Otherwise, we keep going with the... Is there one in the back? No. Sorry? They'll bring it up if they need to? Okay, so, oh, there it is. There's one question there. Sorry, is there a mic that we can...
I'll speak loud. So, especially to you, Udit, you're running a major pharmaceutical company. What is the future of pharmaceutical drugs where these new therapies are coming in next... hello? Forget about Is there a solution to that?
If I knew it, I think I would not be here. Look, it's a pretty large question, and we've broken it up into parts to address it, right? So there is the innovation question, there is a question of taking the innovation to patients, and then there is the delivery question that Rajiv and Maha can address. I think if I take a full step back, we all are focused on taking therapies and taking new ideas and new ways of addressing problems and getting them to patients as fast as possible. While we do it, the industry's model might change, right? So today, the industry, if you just look at the pharmaceutical industry, and then you asked about big pharma, and I suspect that's your question, what happens to the model going forward? I think over the remainder of my career, let's assume I work for 15, 20 years, I think this model will change. This is likely the only industry that remains that has everything that is monolithic. You start from drug discovery and all the way to commercialization and even pharmacovigilance. There are not that many industries that are left that have innovation in the same place as industrialization. So you see different folks representing different parts of the value chain here. Amar works with discovery and financing. Amar works with discovery and financing. You see Nisha talk about the payer system. You see Maha and Rajiv talk about the delivery and what big pharma is doing. Not all of this has to be contained in one company, and I suspect this is going to change, especially with cell and gene therapy, right? So one of the examples that was given was, look, why do we have to take cells from a patient, take them to a different facility, modify them, and lose some cells along the way, then send them back to the patient, and we don't even know if the patient is still alive at that point. Why can't we do it at bedside? What is the clean sheet approach? And we are all thinking about that problem. So I suspect in different parts of the industry, the model will change. But I would not make the mistake of assuming that the model will change tomorrow, right? The model works. It works extremely well for certain types of therapies, but we will have to question how we do things quite dramatically. Thank you for the question. In the meantime, there has been a written question. Maha, you draw the long end of the stick, so you get the first question. Do you think of a holistic approach to replace gene therapy? And I suspect the word holistic here means holy, right? Who's had the question? Okay. Okay, I think we will challenge our expertise, but do you think?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll try and take a stab at it, and obviously I'll invite my fellow panelists to contribute as well. I think there is a place for holistic approaches, natural remedies, but as we all know, there are certain conditions, the underlying pathology is either a defect in the genes or a metabolic dysfunction or whatever it may be. So I think depending on what the illness is that we're talking about, different methods may work. You know, and as Udit pointed out in response to the prior question, the way I see medicine heading is not just having an approach of a different model of delivery of care, but also targeting aspects of preventing disease, stopping progression, and providing functional cures. So they will go hand in hand. I would never say that holistic approaches alone would solve the problem. Because if you take the example of patients with hemophilia or beta thalassemia or sickle cell or spinal muscular atrophy or various oncological conditions at the basis of which is genetic defects, you may not be able to solve that just with holistic approaches alone. But I don't know if my panel members would like to chime in.
Rajiv?
So I would add to that, there are certain sort of fundamental genetic conditions for which the solution is fixing the gene. However, even when you do that, and while you are doing that, the disease stays. And the holistic approaches can give you the augmentative things that are needed along with the gene therapy and all the other things that you're talking about.
So there is no one bullet. Let me take a few other questions, and then we can have a further debate on this topic as well. One question that we all expected. I would ask you to take a guess first by a show of hands. How many years of experience do you think we have on this panel working in India? And I'll give you some numbers, and then you can put up your hands. Greater than 30 years. Anyone for that? Okay, nobody thinks we have more than 30 years of experience working in India. Oh, one person does. Greater than 25. नहीं
Total.
मतलब कुछ लोग लगते हैं थोड़े से ऐसे हैं but सब नहीं है. No, combined, the sum of the parts, right? So somebody said 30. 20, greater than 25, how many takers? Okay, I would say 5% of the population thinks, so less than 1% thinks we are, or 1% thinks we are, have more than 30, another thinks more than 25. How about greater than 15? All right, another 5%. ठीक है, so we made it up to 10, 11%. So roughly 10% of you think that we have more than 15 years of experience on this stage working in India. How many think we have less than 5? All right. Okay, less than 5%. There is no wisdom in crowds. The answer is actually less than 5. I think the winners are right here. So with that said, I'll ask the next question because we anticipated this question. Are these therapies, अब सब jump नहीं करना answer करने के लिए. Are these therapies only for the privileged population? What about access for the third world population? And to be provocative, that's where we are from. So what's your view? I think we can all have a view. Jokes aside, but what is your view? And maybe we start with you, Rajiv.
Okay. So I talked about AI, and unlike all the other things that were presented, AI is something where medicine, being a lagging adopter, has an advantage. Because AI, the computers that go into it, the GPUs that go into it, the software that goes into it, is being developed for other things and is being adopted in AI. And all these are relatively cheap technologies. The GPU cards that your kids have for gaming, that's what makes AI. NVIDIA is inventing these things that are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So I see a very bright future of AI-based technologies where regulation is less and mass appeal is what counts. Like what happened to WhatsApp can happen to many, many AI-based applications. So think of the following. If there's an AI program where you take a picture of a mole and ask the question, is this malignant or is it benign? That technology exists today. There are slides that are being made. You can present it to an AI program, and the program will tell you, these are where I see cancerous cells in this slide. There are places where you can enter your symptoms that you're feeling, and the system can suggest what potentially you could have had. The most powerful example of use of AI actually came from India. So Google went to India from Arvinda Eye. They took 100,000 cases of diabetic retinopathy. They were all graded, nicely done, a lot of hard work on the part of Indian doctors, and they coded their algorithm to predict diabetic retinopathy from the fundus pictures from the back of the eye. You can produce the fundus pictures from the back of the eye with this very simple gadget put on top of your iPhone. Now think of the power of this, where there is a computerized program which can essentially for free give you the diagnosis, and essentially for cents, you can make a picture of the back of your eye. So the diabetic retinopathy it can be thought of as a solved problem from a technological point of view. So I can give you examples after examples where this particular technology...
Diagnosis can be, but you still have to cure it.
Yeah, so the curative part of it, many of these things, for example, controlling diabetes and all these things, these are behavior modification things. So there is really...
I'm in ophthalmology, meaning you have to give them injections of Lucentis, which is $2,000 an injection. In India, you can get Avastin, which is sort of off-label, but it's cheaper. But you still have to give these people injections and give them injections every month or 2 months, which is a big burden on the healthcare system. So, and the number of these folks, the more you identify, and the flip side of it, the more you identify, the more you have to treat, and the healthcare system to some extent gets even more burdened.
Yeah, and I think the question of primary care and the importance of primary care, while we have the technologies, and I think this tension of having the technologies available, and many of them, by the way, being worked upon in India itself. I mean, Bangalore has more programmers than anywhere else that at least I know of, who are working on these technologies. We, as a company, have over 1,500 people in Bangalore working on shared services, as well as application of AI for customer service, for topics that you just mentioned. But the question in India is that of delivery and that of primary care, and then that's a pretty significant question.
And this is just one piece of the solution. Diagnosis is where it starts. Obviously, there's a bigger problem of how to treat the disease. That problem still stays.
But I mean, I think what you do see is that there is application and use and awareness of technology in India, and its healthcare application is advancing. I think that is indisputable. Yet its promise, to realize its promise, requires a whole bunch of other things to start working at the same scale.
So I think AI, I have no doubts that there is a bright future in being able to bring down the cost of diagnosis and distance telemedicine, etc. I think there's cell and gene therapy, whole different ball game. Now, the model that is being developed in the Western systems of these $2 million therapies and coming up with cute ways to pay for them, of I'll pay you, and you can not pay me if it doesn't work, kind of a thing, or I'll split the payments and make you into a mortgage so you can keep paying for the rest of your life. I frankly think, I'm going to take a brutal view and a somewhat controversial view, that these rare diseases are, amiron ka chochole type of a thing to some extent. Okay? Of course, if you're the one who has the rare disease, big problem, right? But on the other hand, if you go to India, there are so many people dying of so many other things that to focus on that fractional 1.01% of the population, while drug-resistant TB is killing so many people, why would you not sort of, from a public health perspective, work on those?
So I had told you we will have different points of view on this panel, and this reflects actually what is happening in India. I want to move on to the next topic, and it is related. I can see my fellow colleagues getting up and saying, look, they have a point of view on this, and and the next one will allow you to comment on it as well, because there's a whole bunch of questions. There's about 10 sheets that have come through, so let's see if we can address a couple of other topics. And the next one, I think, Rahul, I would like you to start. Every year back in India, more than 50 million people get affected by dengue. I think you know this. And chikungunya. This is happening year after year. Like polio has been eradicated, not in India, but not in the rest of the world entirely, as we know. Do you have thoughts if it is possible to eradicate dengue? I think we should give some hope while we are talking about these intractable problems as well, please.
Well, thank you for asking that question, because it is very, very close to my heart. Until this last month when I joined this new company, prior to that I was working for Takeda Pharmaceuticals, where I was responsible for building a vaccine for dengue. And I have good news. We did develop a product that has gone through phase 3 testing, and it is imminently publishing. It's going to get published in the next several days. And this shows that we have a vaccine that will help millions of people in the world. And when we started this business 7 years ago, within a large pharmaceutical company, we took a very deliberate, intentional view that we would go after diseases that have high impact, like dengue, number one. And second, that we had the ethos of access and affordability from day one. So part of how we will solve this problem is also micro level as to who's doing the work, which company is it being done under, and what the intent is and what kind of people do they have. And I think that the cost of goods, which is only one aspect of making these products affordable, is something that was central to us from day one. And so we believe very strongly that this type of vaccine, which is very, very helpful in the tropical countries like India and Brazil, has to be priced affordably so that the common man can buy these products without depending on charity. They can pay from their pockets. Of course, governments will help, but I'm very happy to note that there is very, very strong possibility of bringing a dengue vaccine to the market in the next few years. And for chikungunya, Similar efforts are underway. It's a little bit further down the road, but I'm optimistic that we will have something for that as well. Not at Takeda, but some other company.
Thank you, Rahul. I want to switch just a little bit in the interest of time as well. I think people understand that we have a unique opportunity to observe such terrific people who have accomplished a lot. I think it's also important to talk a little bit about who you are. This is a curveball. There was no practice on this. I believe that the impressions that are created when you are younger, especially when you're growing up in a different environment, continue to inspire you throughout your lives. And very often these are memories that you might not always have, but they are in the reserve. And I want to ask you, what from your background, and I know all of us grew in different parts of India and different parts of the world, what would you say from your experiences continues to inspire you to this day? And what advice would you give to folks who are here to probably, and in some ways, follow your path as well? And for this, let's start with you, Nisha.
That was indeed a curveball, but I mean, for me, just growing up in India, I've grown up in India, studied in India. The thing that I remember, the thing that I still take a lot is just perseverance and resilience. Growing up in India in the middle class environment, with the competition that is there, with the amount of, how do I say, the will that you have to succeed, right? And the amount of effort and perseverance you put behind it. And I think that still is very, very true for me, especially if you think of the healthcare space. If it's R&D, it takes 8 years, at least at minimum, to get a therapy from the inception to into the market. And with the probability of success, that's very low. If you're in the commercial space like I am, you know you can work on one part of the system, but the system is extremely complex, right? And it's very easy to get frustrated very, very quickly in this space and also start pointing fingers and saying, oh, it's a problem of that part of the body or a part of this part. For me, I think, and my advice to all of you would be just persevere, right? At the end of the day, this is one of the industries that's actually helping patients and curing lives at the end of it. So keep that thought in mind, and I think, and just keep the perseverance, and it'll definitely pay off.
Thank you. I think any of us who've gone to school in India know that competing with left and right is quite important. Let's turn to you, Ganesh. You came to the US at a pretty young age as well. What impressions do you have from your background and also in the US?
So I grew up in India as well, in a little town about 200 kilometers outside of Chennai, a town called Neyveli. Right through my growing up, I think I will connect it to something that was mentioned in the last panel. You're always encouraged to dream big, take on problems much bigger than you are, aspire for going to the best college. So that was always all around me at all times. You're always pushed much more than you can. And so to me, that has contaminated my thinking in every way. So to some extent, when Nisha said healthcare system is very big, yes, it is very big, but somebody has to take it on. I don't believe I can, but I'm hoping, I'm appealing to the entrepreneurs in the audience that you can pick that up and something has to change about that. And so to me, I've always come with this thing about anything is possible. And so you can, sometimes it's the foolishness of not knowing, but the fact that you don't know, sometimes you take on problems that are much bigger than you, and then the perseverance just tries to get you on the other side.
Brilliant. You see the two extremes: perseverance to get to the goal that you can define, and going after a goal that is rather not well defined. But both those things are important. Rajiv, how about you?
So that's a curveball, and I'm sort of struggling to see where I should start. Okay, since you started from where you grew up, let me start there. So my mom, for a short time, moved to this. They were from UP, but they moved to this. My mom got a job as an elementary school teacher in a small village in Rajasthan, not too far from Jaipur, actually. And my dad was in school. He was not making any money, so she just packed us up all, and we went to this small village. No, essentially, no infrastructure to speak of, no running water, no, I mean, basically it's a small town and a small elementary school. And that's where I grew up. I did not go to school actually until my parents moved to a town where I could actually go to school. And so I started my education in 5th grade. And all the kids were talking English, and they were like, they could read books and so on. And all I could do was recite the poems from the scripture and then the Bhagavad Gita and so on that my mom used to read to me. And so I got scared. Saying, my mom, I mean, I can't follow anything that they're talking about in school. So okay, no, you can do it. And she went to the principal. Principal said, yeah, he should at least know the alphabet or something, you know. So they, okay, put him in 4th grade. And it's all informal, so they put me in the 4th grade. And having grown up in that environment, that's some of the most carefree time I've had. I tell all my American friends, I can still make a camel sit, because there's a very specific way you can make at least an Indian camel sit. And basically, because my parents moved to a town, I got a chance to go to get an education. I went to BITS. I trained as an engineer. I came to graduate program here, did my PhD, taught computer science for some time at University of Southern California, then moved from there to General Electric, worked as an engineer there, building X-ray machines and CT scanners and so on. Then I had a midlife crisis. So I said, well, what should I do next? So I was fascinated by medicine. Even back in India also, I would actually sit with my friends who were going to medical school, and I would like get a white coat and sit in KEM hospital in Mumbai when I was working for some time in Mumbai. And I was still fascinated, and so I had an appointment or I had a posting from GE in a hospital building the system that we're building, and I was just like mesmerized by what the physicians were doing. So I came home and I told my wife, I'm going to resign my job, and I'm going to go to medical school. She said, no, you're old. I mean, have you ever seen anybody over the age of 35 go to medical school? I mean, they're 20 years old go to medical school. So I sat on this idea, but it was sort of it was gnawing on me. And I said, how old would I be when I actually totally finish this? So my wife promptly calculated. She said, you'll be 46-year-old when you get your first job. So that was enough to squash my dreams for 1 year. And then I said, well, I'll be 46 no matter what. Okay. So might as well do this other thing. So I resigned my GE job, I sold my house, and I moved the entire family to a dorm in New York City. I went to Cornell. And the dean was very, very supportive, said, sure, I mean, we'll give you, normally we have like 3 kids to this apartment, we'll give you the entire family thing. So we went through this, and then I came and did my residency, and I stayed on staff here. So the lesson that I've learned is really something, a little bit about perseverance, but more about the support structure that you have. It's your parents, your wife, your family, your kids, how supportive they are. They are the ones that make you.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you. Amar, you seem like you're raring to go.
I was sitting back.
Even then you look imposing.
No, I'm going to actually take a more strategy versus tactic kind of approach.
That's my task.
Which is that, coming from a Sikh background, we have 3 tenets that govern how we go about life, which is Naam Japo, which means subdue your ego, Kirat Karo, which means make an honest, hard-working living, and then Van Chako, which is share whatever you have with other people. So in my professional life, what I ended up doing to apply it, I have a 3-point kind of a system, value system that we use, which is that work on something that really matters, something that is a significant need, because you'll go through many trials and tribulations where you'll wonder saying, what are you really doing? And at that time, it'll reaffirm the fact that this is worth doing because it wasn't picked as some orphan disease because you could make some money on it. If you really believe that that needed to be solved, then that's a different matter. But it shouldn't just be dictated by financial considerations. So work on something that really matters. Find people who you will do that work with who have different skill sets but aligned values. So they think values-wise the same way but bring different skill sets. So you construct a real team that'll have respect around it. And then ultimately from that, good things will come, whether it is money, fame, whatever, cures, legacy. But don't try to get focused on that. Now, this could be the Hindu philosophy of karam karo and fal ki chinta mat karo or whatever in that regard. But basically, if you turn that pyramid upside down and start focusing on, I want to make money, and then who do I work with, you will find that you'll start working with people who are unsavory people, who are shady people, and slowly you will realize that you have sold your soul and you've lost yourself. So by keeping it that way, we've now surrounded ourselves with many other good people that we've had the good fortune of working with in these different ventures. And in my view, that is my sadh sangat, so to speak. And that gives us great joy because they're good people. When you surround yourself with good people, you get energized, you feel good, you'll work on good things, and life suddenly becomes much more pleasant.
Well done. Well done. Maha, you get to go second to last, so you at least have a little bit of hope left because it seems these are highly, highly inspiring stories.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, what my formative years, the thing that left the most impression on me was my mom being diagnosed with diabetes about 45 years ago, and type 1, and she's been on insulin since then. In spite of being tightly controlled, she ended up having diabetes complications, lost eyesight in both eyes, fortunately regained back partial eyesight because of laser photocoagulation. Cardiovascular disease, has gone through cabbage, has had neuropathy, nephropathy, you name it, right? So that is what makes me who I am. Obviously, the support of my family, the support of my husband, who's here in the audience, my daughter. But my philosophy in life is very similar to what I've heard my colleagues here say. It's be humble, be thankful for the life we have today because we're blessed with what we have. There are people in this world who do not have anything as compared to what we have. Work hard and never give up. So for me, the word no does not exist. So we talk about rare diseases, we talk about gene and cell therapies. What I'm looking at right now as part of my job at Sanofi is how do we get to this primary care population that Udit talked about, is how do we look at diabetes? Can we look at beta cell replacement therapies? Can we look at islet cell transplantations that can be essentially broadened out to reach the masses? Because diabetes and obesity today have reached pandemic proportions. So how do we get to that point? It's easier said than done, but one step at a time, right? So again, impossible is I am possible, right? So I follow that philosophy in life.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think that leaves only one possibility, Dr. Singhvi.
Thanks, Udit. So as I've been listening to all this, I realized that when I was growing up, I had only one ambition, and that is to make it. I had a very survivalistic instinct. So I think the main point I'd like to make is that I think your value system can change during your life. And it has in my case. I think as I was growing up in India, when I went to IIT or when I went to graduate school here, it was all about me. I wanted to be number one in my class. I wanted to impress other people. I wanted to make it big. I wanted to make money. Yeah. But I think over time, as I moved up, I realized that these things that were my success strategies hit a wall. And a time came when nobody cared. When you get into a position of leadership, nobody cares about how smart you are. Nobody cares. They actually don't like the fact that you want to be the smartest person in the room. It's how much you care about other people that matters. And this was 180 degrees for me. So the transition that I went through, partly by making mistakes, partly by taking hits, and a large part because I had a very great life partner with me, my wife, who showed me the mirror. And over the last 20 years, I believe it transformed me, and I feel I was reborn. And today, my value system is very different. And I think if there's something I want to give back here for those of you who want to listen is just be open to change, and believe in the fact that there's a lot more intelligence around you that'll guide you if you're open to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. So I think it would be unfair for me to not address that question as well. And I've been told that there's only 1 minute left, so I'll keep my story rather short. I grew up in a joint family in India, and if you know of Punjabi joint families, the stereotypes that you see in movies, they're right. We lived in a single house, my dad and his 2 brothers. I'm the oldest out of the kids. And we moved lock, stock, and barrel to the US. One brother moved, then the other one followed, and the third one followed, and they decided to live in the same house in the US as well. But in India, I can tell you that the joint family was super supportive. My dad had gone to Nigeria to teach. I went with him. My brother did as well, and my mom did as well. But after about a year of cutting school and my dad finding out that I was actually not in school most of the time that I was going to school, he said, it's time to go back to the house, live with your grandmother and your uncle. And that was like I was back home. So the joint family, the collective supported me a lot. And I have a big belief in the collective. And then when we came to the US, so the joint family has the opposite end too, right? When you live in a collective, there's friction as well. And I experienced that as well. To give you an example, in the US, you get your driver's license when you're 16, right? And my son is now 15 and change, and he's clamoring to get his driver's license. I had actually started to drive in India when I was 14. But when I came to the US, you had to wait another year or so. The day we had to get our driver's license, as we were walking out the door, my dad and me, my youngest uncle was coming down the stairs. I remember it like it was yesterday, right? So he came down the stairs. He said, "Bhai Sahab, 1 minute." So Bhai Sahab turns around and he says, and my dad is the eldest. And he turns around and he says, "Oh, kya baat hai?" He said, "Oh, on the baitho." So Bhai Sahab went and sat down, and of course the son was standing next to the door. And then my third uncle walked down, my middle chacha ji also walked down, and they all sat down, and अब इस पे सलाह मशवरा हो रहा था कि बेटे को लाइसेंस लेके देना है कि नहीं, right? So, I mean, I'm standing there watching this whole saga unfold, and they discussed, and my chachi is down, my mom is down, they're all discussing as if it's like buying a washing machine much further down. My dad was offended. Like when we first bought our first washing machine after marriage, he said, "Look, why didn't you ask?" But it was kind of like this, right? So they're all sitting around, and the eventual decision was no. Kyun? Why was that decision made? Munda ladkiyon ko dudaega. And that, I mean, for those of you who didn't understand the Punjabi, it meant the boy is going to take girls around in that
Actually,
one
I was just
car.
listening to music yesterday on the Lamborghini one, if you've ever seen that.
I think it's exactly the same, right? And all 3 brothers actually at the time owned one car. I was number 7 out of 7 to have the chance to drive because everybody above me had a driver's license. So there was 0 chance. But theoretically, the decision was taken not for me to drive. The moral of the story being collectives are really important, and the collective always supports you. But the will of the individual is equally important. So eventually I got my license and I did other things. But the will of the individual is equally important. I think what I take from our philosophy, where I grew up, is the individual, as long as you do something, and you heard this from my colleagues as well, as long as you do something that benefits the collective, more than it benefits you, it is sustainable. And with that, let's conclude the panel and thank my esteemed colleagues for sharing their views. Thank you very much for your attention. And there were, I think, about 15 questions, and I thought I didn't want to favor one person or the other. So if you still want to ask these questions, the colleagues are around for a few minutes. Thank you.